The box of chocolate chip cookies, sitting on Lillian Norton's kitchen counter at 5 in the morning, should have been the first sign that her life was about to change forever. She had woken up extra early to bake them, just like she did every Thursday night before her Friday shift at Vandermere Publishing House, one of the largest book publishing companies in New York City. The recipe was her grandmother's, passed down through 3 generations, and there was something about sharing them with her coworkers that made the long weeks feel worthwhile. It was a small gesture, she knew, but in an office of 200 people spread across 15 floors, small gestures mattered. Lillian carefully placed the cookies into a decorative tin she had bought specifically for this purpose. She was 26 years old, had been working as a junior editor at Vandermeer for 8 months, and still felt like she was finding her footing in the corporate world. The cookies had started as a way to make friends, to carve out her own little tradition in a place where everyone seemed so busy and important. Now, every Friday, people looked forward to them. They gathered in the break room on the 7th floor, where her department worked, and for 20 minutes, the stress of deadlines and manuscript revisions melted away. She arrived at the office at 7:30, earlier than most. The morning sun cast long shadows through the tall windows of the building's lobby, and the security guard, Marcus, waved at her with his usual friendly smile. "Got the goods again?" he asked, nodding toward her tin. "Always," Lillian said, returning his smile. "Want one before the vultures descend? You know I do." She opened the tin and handed him 2 cookies wrapped in a napkin. Marcus had been one of the first people to be kind to her when she started, and she never forgot that. The elevator ride to the 7th floor was quiet, the mechanical hum the only sound. When the doors opened, the office was still mostly empty. Lillian made her way to the break room, set the tin on the center table, and removed the lid. The smell of chocolate and brown sugar filled the small space immediately. She had just finished arranging the cookies when she heard footsteps behind her. "You are a saint, you know that." Lillian turned to see Rebecca Chang, one of the senior editors and her mentor, standing in the doorway with her coffee mug. "Just trying to make Fridays better," Lillian said. "Well, you succeed every week." Rebecca walked over and took a cookie, biting into it with an appreciative sound. "These are seriously dangerous. I have been trying to eat healthy all week, and then you show up with these." "Sorry, not sorry," Lillian said, grinning. As the morning progressed, more people filtered into the break room. There was Daniel from marketing, who always took 3 cookies and promised he would work them off at the gym. There was Sarah from accounting, who told Lillian every single week that she needed to open a bakery. There was Tom, the junior designer, who was quiet but always gave her a grateful nod. By 9 o'clock, the tin was half empty and Lillian was back at her desk, working through a manuscript that needed her attention. It was a historical romance, and while the story had potential, the pacing was off. She was deep in concentration, red pen in hand, when her phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line made her pause. "All staff meeting, 10 a.m. conference room A." All staff meetings were rare. The last one had been 6 months ago when the company announced a merger that never ended up happening. Lillian saved her work and stood, smoothing down her navy blue dress. Whatever this was about, it was important. Conference room A was on the 15th floor, the executive level. Lillian had only been up there twice, both times to deliver documents. The elevator ride felt longer than usual, and when she stepped out, she was struck by how different this floor felt. The carpet was plusher, the walls adorned with framed covers of best-selling books the company had published over the decades. Everything screamed prestige and success. The conference room was already filling up with employees. Lillian found a seat near the back, next to Rebecca, who looked just as curious as everyone else. "Any idea what this is about?" Lillian whispered. Rebecca shook her head. "No clue, but I heard rumors that Gregory Vandermere himself is making an announcement." Lillian's eyebrows shot up. Gregory Vandermere was the CEO of Vandermere Publishing House, a man who was more legend than reality to most of the employees. He was 33 years old and had taken over the company from his father 5 years ago. Under his leadership, the company had flourished, acquiring smaller publishers and signing major authors. But he was notoriously private, rarely seen outside of board meetings and high-level negotiations. Lillian had never even caught a glimpse of him. The room quieted as the door at the front opened. A tall man walked in and Lillian felt her breath catch. Gregory Vandermere was nothing like she had imagined. She had expected someone older, maybe a bit stuffy, the kind of person who wore expensive suits and looked perpetually serious. And while he did wear a suit, perfectly tailored and charcoal gray, there was something else about him. He was handsome in a way that was almost unfair, with dark hair that looked like he had run his hands through it a few too many times, sharp features, and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. But it was not just his appearance. It was the way he carried himself, confident but not arrogant, like someone who knew exactly who he was and did not need to prove it to anyone. "Good morning," he said, his voice steady and clear. The room fell into complete silence. "I will keep this brief, because I know you all have work to get back to. I wanted to address some concerns that have been circulating about the company's direction." He went on to talk about their quarterly earnings, new acquisitions, and upcoming projects. Lillian tried to focus on his words, but she found herself distracted by the way he spoke, the way he made eye contact with different sections of the room, making everyone feel included. He was not reading from notes. He was speaking from the heart, and it was evident that he cared deeply about the company and the people who worked for it. "I also want to remind everyone that this company's success is built on each of you," Gregory continued. "From the editors who shape our stories to the designers who make them beautiful, from the marketers who get them into readers' hands to the people who keep this building running every day. You all matter, and I do not say that lightly." There was a murmur of appreciation throughout the room. Lillian glanced at Rebecca, who looked impressed. "That is all I have for today," Gregory said, offering a small smile. "Thank you for your time." As people began to stand and file out, Lillian gathered her things. She was almost to the door when she heard a voice behind her. "Excuse me." She turned and her heart nearly stopped. Gregory Vandermere was standing a few feet away, looking directly at her. "Yes," she managed to say, hoping her voice did not betray her sudden nervousness. "You are Lillian Norton, right? Junior editor on the 7th floor," she blinked, surprised. "Yes." "How did you know?" "I make it a point to know my employees," he said. "I wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" "For what?" "The cookies," he said, and there was a hint of warmth in his eyes. "I was in the 7th floor break room this morning for a meeting that ran early, and I saw the tin. Someone mentioned they were yours. I had one, and it reminded me of my grandmother's baking. That is a rare thing." Lillian felt her cheeks flush. "Oh, well, thank you. I am glad you enjoyed it." "I did." He paused, as if considering his next words. "It is nice to see someone bringing a personal touch to the office. Keep it up." Before she could respond, he gave her a polite nod and walked away, leaving her standing there with a strange fluttering in her chest. That evening, Lillian could not stop thinking about the encounter. She replayed it over and over as she made dinner, as she sat on her couch with a book she could not focus on. Gregory Vandermere, the CEO of the company, had not only known her name but had gone out of his way to thank her for something as simple as cookies. It felt surreal. The following Friday, Lillian baked cookies again. She told herself it was just her normal routine, but a small part of her wondered if Gregory might be on the 7th floor again. He was not. The day passed like any other, and by the time she left the office, she felt a little foolish for even hoping. But on the 3rd Friday, everything changed. Lillian was in the break room, setting out the cookies as usual, when the door opened and Gregory walked in. He was alone, dressed more casually than she had seen him before, in a navy sweater and dark jeans. It was early, barely 7:45, and the office was still quiet. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm. "Good morning," Lillian replied, trying to keep her composure. "You are up here early." "I had some work to catch up on," he said, walking over to the table. "But I would be lying if I said the cookies were not part of the reason I came by." She laughed, a genuine sound that surprised her. "Well, help yourself." He took one, biting into it thoughtfully. "Chocolate chip again." "Do you ever make other flavors?" "Sometimes," Lillian said. "I have done oatmeal raisin, white chocolate macadamia, even snickerdoodles, but chocolate chip is the crowd favorite." "I can see why." He leaned against the table, and Lillian noticed how relaxed he seemed, so different from the composed CEO she had seen in the conference room. "How long have you been doing this?" "Since my 2nd week here," she said. "I wanted to make friends, I guess." It is easy to feel invisible in a big company. "You are not invisible," Gregory said, his gaze steady. "Trust me." There was something in the way he said it that made Lillian's pulse quicken. She busied herself with rearranging the cookies, trying to ignore the warmth spreading through her chest. "Do you bake anything else?" he asked. "Pretty much anything," she said. "Cakes, pies, bread. My grandmother taught me. She said that food made with care could bring people together." "She sounds like a wise woman." She was. Gregory nodded, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "My grandmother was the same. She used to make these lemon bars that were so good, my brother and I would fight over the last one." "You have a brother?" "Yeah. He is a doctor in Boston. We do not see each other as often as I would like, but we are close." It was strange, Lillian thought, how easy it was to talk to him. She had expected someone in his position to be distant, maybe even unapproachable, but Gregory was neither of those things. He was just a person, standing in a break room, eating a cookie and talking about his family. "I should let you get back to work," Gregory said after a moment, straightening up. "But thank you again. These really do make the week better." "Anytime," Lillian said, and she meant it. As he left, she found herself smiling, a lightness in her chest that stayed with her for the rest of the day. The 4th Friday, Gregory showed up again. This time, there were a few other people in the break room, and Lillian watched as he greeted them by name, asking about their projects and their families. He was genuine, she realized, not just going through the motions. He cared. When he finally made his way to the cookie tin, he caught her eye and smiled. "Oatmeal raisin this week." "I thought I would mix it up," she said. "Good choice." They did not talk long that day, but it did not matter. There was an understanding between them now, a quiet connection that Lillian could not quite put into words. By the 5th Friday, Lillian started to wonder if Gregory was coming to the 7th floor just for the cookies, or if there was something more. She tried not to read too much into it, but it was hard not to notice the way his face lit up when he saw her, the way he always seemed to linger a little longer than necessary. "You know," Rebecca said one afternoon, cornering Lillian by the printer, "I think Gregory Vandermere has a thing for you." Lillian nearly choked. "What? No, he is just being nice." "Lillian, the man has come to our floor every Friday for the past month. He never did that before you started bringing cookies." "That is just a coincidence." Rebecca gave her a knowing look. "Sure it is." Lillian tried to brush it off, but Rebecca's words stuck with her. Could there be truth to them? And if there was, what did that mean? The 6th Friday, Gregory arrived later than usual, just before 9. Lillian was about to leave the break room when he walked in, looking slightly frazzled. "Rough morning?" she asked. "You could say that," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Back-to-back meetings since 6. I almost forgot it was Friday." "Well, you are just in time," Lillian said, gesturing to the tin. He took a cookie and sighed, the tension in his shoulders easing. "You have no idea how much I needed this. Bad meetings, just frustrating ones. Sometimes I feel like I am fighting battles on every front." He paused, then looked at her. "Sorry, I should not be unloading on you." "It is okay," Lillian said. "Everyone needs to vent sometimes." "What about you?" Gregory asked. "How are you finding the job?" "I love it," Lillian said honestly. "It is challenging, but in a good way. I get to work on stories, help shape them into something people will want to read. It is everything I hoped it would be." "That is good to hear." He smiled, and Lillian felt that familiar flutter again. "We are lucky to have you." The 7th Friday, Gregory brought someone with him. It was a woman, tall and elegant, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a designer handbag. Lillian felt her stomach drop. "This is Amanda," Gregory said, introducing her. "She is a literary agent I have been working with on a new deal." "Nice to meet you," Amanda said, her smile polite but distant. "Nice to meet you too," Lillian replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Amanda took a cookie, made a non-committal sound, and started talking to Gregory about contracts and negotiations. Lillian excused herself, retreating to her desk with a strange ache in her chest. She told herself she was being ridiculous. Gregory was her boss, nothing more. Whatever she had been imagining was just that, imagination. But on the 8th Friday, when Gregory showed up alone again, that ache faded. "No Amanda today?" Lillian asked, trying to sound casual. "No, that deal fell through," Gregory said, "which is probably for the best. She wanted too much creative control." "That is too bad." "Not really." He took a cookie, his eyes meeting hers. "I would rather work with people who understand what we are trying to build here." There was something in his tone, something that made Lillian think he was not just talking about business. The 9th Friday, Gregory asked her a question that caught her off guard. "You ever take requests for cookies?" Lillian asked. "Yeah. I was wondering if you could make those lemon bars I mentioned, the ones my grandmother used to make." "I can try," Lillian said, her heart beating a little faster. "Do you have the recipe?" "No, but I remember the taste, tangy sweet with a buttery crust. I think I can figure it out." That week, Lillian spent hours perfecting the recipe. She tested different ratios of lemon juice to sugar, experimented with the crust, and finally landed on something she thought was close. When Friday came, she packed the lemon bars in a separate container, just for Gregory. When he walked into the break room and saw them, his expression shifted to something Lillian could not quite name. "You made them," he said softly. "I hope they are close to what you remember." He took one, biting into it slowly. For a moment, he did not say anything, and Lillian felt a pang of worry. Then he looked at her, and there was something raw in his eyes. "They are perfect," he said. "Thank you. You are welcome." They stood there for a moment, the noise of the office fading into the background. Lillian felt like something had shifted between them, something deeper than casual conversations over cookies. The 10th Friday, Gregory asked her to have coffee with him. "Not here," he said quickly, as if worried she might say no. "There is a place a few blocks away. It is quiet, good coffee." "I thought maybe we could talk." Lillian's mind raced. Was this a date, a work thing? Did it matter? "Okay," she said. "I would like that." They went that afternoon, slipping out of the office during lunch. The cafe was small and cozy, with mismatched chairs and shelves lined with books. Gregory ordered a black coffee and Lillian got a latte. "I come here when I need to think," Gregory said, settling into a chair by the window. It is one of the few places where I do not feel like I am being watched. Is that hard? Lillian asked. Being the CEO, I mean. Always having people watch you. Sometimes, he admitted. I knew what I was getting into when I took over the company, but there are days when I miss being anonymous, just another person in the world. You are still just another person, Lillian said. You just happen to run a publishing house. He laughed, a genuine sound that made her smile. I like the way you see things. They talked for over an hour, the conversation flowing easily. Gregory told her about his love for books, how he had grown up surrounded by them because of his father's work. Lillian shared her own stories about studying English literature in college, about the first novel that made her cry, about her dream of one day editing a bestseller. You will, Gregory said with certainty. I have seen your work. You have a gift. Thank you, Lillian said, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. When they finally left the cafe, the sun was lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the city. Gregory walked her back to the office, and when they reached the entrance, he hesitated. I really enjoyed this, he said. Me too. Maybe we could do it again sometime. I would like that. The 11th Friday, Lillian baked double chocolate cookies, rich and decadent. Gregory showed up with a small bag in hand. I brought you something, he said, handing it to her. Inside was a first edition of one of her favorite novels, the cover worn but beautiful. Gregory, I cannot accept this, Lillian said, her voice shaking. This must be worth a fortune. It is just a book, he said, though his smile suggested he knew exactly how much it meant. I saw it at an estate sale last weekend and thought of you. Thank you, she whispered, clutching the book to her chest. That day, they spent nearly an hour in the break room, talking and laughing until Rebecca poked her head in and reminded Lillian she had a meeting. The 12th Friday, something in the air felt different. Gregory arrived earlier than usual, and when Lillian walked into the break room, he was already there, pacing. Hey, she said, concerned. Is everything okay? He stopped, turning to look at her. I need to tell you something. Lillian's heart skipped. Okay. I have been coming to this floor every Friday not just for the cookies, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I have been coming because of you. Because talking to you, spending time with you, it is the best part of my week. And I know this is complicated, I know I am your boss, but I cannot keep pretending that what I feel is just friendship. Lillian felt like the world had tilted. Gregory, you do not have to say anything, he said quickly. I just needed you to know, but Lillian did not want to stay silent. I feel the same way, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I have for weeks now. The relief on his face was immediate. He stepped closer and Lillian met him halfway. They did not kiss, not yet, but the way he looked at her, the way his hand gently touched hers, said everything words could not. I want to do this right, Gregory said. No secrets, no complications. If this is going to happen, I want everyone to know. I do not want you to feel like you have to hide. I do not want to hide either, Lillian said. Then we will figure it out, he said. Together. That weekend, Gregory called her. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. He told her about his favorite childhood memories, about the pressure of living up to his father's legacy, about the loneliness that came with success. Lillian shared her own fears and dreams, and for the first time in a long time, she felt truly seen. On Monday, Gregory sent an email to the HR department disclosing their relationship. By Tuesday, the news had spread through the office. Some people were surprised, others had seen it coming. Rebecca pulled Lillian aside with a grin. I knew it, she said. I absolutely knew it. Lillian could not help but laugh. You were right. So what now? I do not know, Lillian admitted, but I am excited to find out. The 13th Friday arrived with a mix of anticipation and nerves. Lillian baked her grandmother's chocolate chip cookies again, the recipe that had started everything. She arrived at the office early, set the tin in the break room, and waited. Gregory showed up at 8, dressed in a sharp suit, but there was something different about him. He looked nervous, a rarity for someone usually so composed. "Hey," Lillian said, smiling. "You okay?" "Yeah," he said, though his voice wavered slightly. "Can we talk? Somewhere private, of course." He led her to his office on the 15th floor, a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Lillian had never been in there before, and she took a moment to absorb the view. "Lillian," Gregory said, and when she turned, he was standing in the center of the room, his hands in his pockets. "These past 13 weeks have been the best of my life. Before you started bringing those cookies, I was just going through the motions. Work, meetings, more work. I had forgotten what it felt like to look forward to something, to feel genuine joy." "Gregory," Lillian said softly, stepping closer. "You reminded me that life is more than deadlines and board meetings. You brought warmth and kindness into a place that can sometimes feel cold and impersonal. And somewhere along the way I fell in love with you." Lillian's breath caught. "You love me." "I do," he said, his voice steady now. "I know it has only been a few months and maybe this is crazy, but I have never been more sure of anything in my life." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Lillian's heart nearly stopped. "I am not asking you to marry me today," Gregory said, opening the box to reveal a stunning ring, a simple diamond set on a delicate gold band. "But I am asking if you will let me spend the rest of my life proving to you how much you mean to me. Will you marry me, Lillian?" Tears welled in her eyes and she nodded, unable to find her voice at first. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Gregory slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he was kissing her, and Lillian felt like she was floating. It was not just the kiss, though that was perfect. It was everything. The way he held her like she was the most precious thing in the world, the way her heart felt full to bursting, the way she knew, without a doubt, that this was where she was meant to be. When they finally pulled apart, Gregory rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he whispered. "I love you too," Lillian said, smiling through her tears. They spent the rest of the day together, making plans and talking about the future. Gregory wanted a small wedding, something intimate with just their closest friends and family. Lillian agreed, though she insisted on making the cake herself. "Of course you do," Gregory said, laughing. Over the next few months, their relationship deepened in ways Lillian had not thought possible. Gregory was thoughtful and attentive, always making time for her despite his demanding schedule. He took her to book launches and quiet dinners, to Broadway shows and weekend getaways. He introduced her to his brother, who flew in from Boston and immediately gave his approval. "You are good for him," his brother Daniel told Lillian over dinner one night. "I have not seen him this happy in years." "He is good for me too," Lillian said, glancing at Gregory across the table. He caught her eye and winked, and she felt her heart swell. Lillian introduced Gregory to her own family, a small group consisting of her parents and her younger sister, Emma. Her mother cried when she met him, overwhelmed by how kind and respectful he was. Her father, a quiet man who did not trust easily, pulled Lillian aside after dinner. "He is a good man," her father said. "You chose well." "I know," Lillian said, her voice thick with emotion. The wedding took place 6 months later in a small chapel surrounded by gardens in full bloom. Lillian wore a simple white dress, elegant and timeless, and Gregory could not take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle. The ceremony was intimate, with only 50 guests, but it was perfect. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to support each other, to laugh together, to face whatever challenges life threw at them as a team. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Gregory kissed her like it was the first and last time all at once, and the small crowd erupted in applause. The reception was held in a nearby vineyard, with string lights and live music and tables laden with food. Lillian had indeed made the cake, a three-tiered masterpiece decorated with fresh flowers. When it came time to cut it, Gregory whispered in her ear, "I knew you would make the best cake I have ever tasted." "You have not even tried it yet," Lillian said, laughing. "I do not need to. Everything you make is perfect." They danced under the stars, surrounded by the people they loved, and Lillian felt like she was living in a dream. But it was not a dream. It was real, and it was hers. Over the next year, they settled into married life with surprising ease. Gregory had worried that combining their personal and professional lives would be complicated, but it turned out to be the opposite. They balanced each other. Lillian kept him grounded, reminding him to take breaks and not let work consume him. Gregory pushed her to aim higher, to believe in her abilities and take on bigger projects. Under his encouragement, Lillian was promoted to senior editor, a role she had worked hard for and earned on her own merit. They moved into a townhouse in Brooklyn, a charming place with a small garden where Lillian grew herbs and vegetables. Gregory learned to cook, though he was not nearly as talented in the kitchen as Lillian. Still, he tried, and she loved him for it. On the anniversary of their first coffee date, Gregory surprised her with a trip to Paris. They spent a week exploring the city, visiting bookstores and cafes, eating pastries and drinking wine, and falling in love with each other all over again. "I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy," Gregory told her one night as they stood on a bridge overlooking the Seine. "You already do," Lillian said, leaning into him. 2 years into their marriage, Lillian found out she was pregnant. She told Gregory over breakfast, placing the positive test next to his coffee cup. He stared at it for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and then he looked up at her with tears in his eyes. "We are having a baby," he asked, his voice breaking. "We are having a baby," Lillian confirmed. He stood, pulling her into his arms and holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I love you so much," he said. "Thank you. Thank you for this." The pregnancy was not easy. Lillian struggled with morning sickness and exhaustion, and there were moments when she felt overwhelmed. But Gregory was there every step of the way, attending every doctor's appointment, reading parenting books, setting up the nursery with meticulous care. He painted the walls a soft yellow and assembled the crib himself, refusing to let anyone else help. "I want to do this," he said when Lillian offered to hire someone. "This is our baby. I want to be part of every moment." Their daughter, Grace, was born on a snowy December evening. She had Lillian's dark hair and Gregory's eyes, and from the moment the nurse placed her in Lillian's arms, she knew their lives had changed forever. Gregory cried when he held her for the first time, his hands trembling as he cradled the tiny bundle. "She is perfect," he whispered. "You are perfect." The early days of parenthood were chaotic and exhausting, but they were also filled with joy. Gregory took paternity leave, something almost unheard of for a CEO, but he did not care what anyone thought. He wanted to be there for his family, and he was. He changed diapers and sang lullabies, often off-key but with so much love that it made Lillian's heart ache. As Grace grew, so did their family. 2 years later, they welcomed a son, Henry, who had Lillian's laugh and Gregory's determination. Their townhouse was filled with noise and laughter and the beautiful chaos of raising children. Lillian continued to work, though she scaled back her hours to spend more time at home. Gregory did the same, delegating more responsibilities and trusting his team to handle the day-to-day operations. He had learned that success was not just about building a company. It was about building a life, On Friday evenings, Lillian still baked cookies. Now, Grace and Henry helped, their small hands covered in flour as they shaped the dough. Gregory would come home from work to find the kitchen a mess and his family laughing, and he would think about how far they had come, about how a simple tradition had led to the greatest love of his life. One Friday, years after that first week, Gregory walked into the kitchen and wrapped his arms around Lillian from behind as she pulled a tray of cookies from the oven. "You ever think about how this all started?" he asked, resting his chin on her shoulder. "All the time," Lillian said, leaning back into him. "I am so glad you brought those cookies to the office," he said. "I am so glad I worked up the courage to talk to you." "I am glad too," Lillian said, turning to kiss him. "I am glad for all of it." Their children ran into the kitchen, Grace grabbing a cookie before it had cooled and Henry climbing onto a chair to reach the tin. Gregory laughed, pulling away from Lillian to scoop Henry up. "Careful, buddy, they are still hot." "But they smell so good," Henry protested. "They always do," Gregory said, ruffling his son's hair. Lillian watched them, her heart full. She thought about the girl she had been, nervous and hopeful, walking into that office with a tin of cookies. She thought about Gregory, the man who had seen her, truly seen her, and chosen to build a life with her. It had not always been easy. There had been challenges, moments of doubt, times when they had to fight for their relationship. But they had faced it all together, and that made all the difference. As the evening sun streamed through the kitchen windows, casting everything in a golden glow, Lillian felt a profound sense of gratitude. For her family, for her life, for the unexpected twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. Gregory caught her eye across the room and smiled, that same smile that had made her heart flutter all those years ago. And Lillian smiled back, knowing that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. Because love, real love, was not just about grand gestures or perfect moments. It was about showing up day after day and choosing each other. It was about baking cookies on Friday mornings and holding hands through the hard times. It was about building a life, piece by piece, and finding joy in the simple, beautiful moments along the way. And as Lillian stood in her kitchen, surrounded by the people she loved most in the world, she knew that she had found something rare and precious. She had found home, not in a place but in a person, in Gregory and in the family they had created together. Years passed, and their love only grew stronger. Grace and Henry grew into bright, curious children who loved books as much as their parents. On weekends, the family would visit the Vandermere publishing house, which had expanded under Gregory's leadership but never lost its heart. Grace loved exploring the different floors, imagining the stories behind each book on the shelves. Henry preferred the design department, fascinated by the way covers came to life. Lillian had eventually published her first novel, a romance that drew from her own experiences without being autobiographical. It became a bestseller, and she found herself on the other side of the editorial process, working with a junior editor at Vandermere who reminded her so much of herself years ago. "You are going to do great things," Lillian told the young woman during one of their meetings. "I believe in you." The woman's eyes lit up, and Lillian remembered what it felt like to have someone believe in her potential. She made a mental note to pay it forward more often. Gregory, now in his early 40s, had become one of the most respected figures in publishing. But he never let success change who he was. He still remembered employees' names, still asked about their families, still made time for the things that mattered. He had learned from his father's mistakes, refusing to let work consume him the way it had consumed the previous generation. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Gregory took Lillian back to the cafe where they had their first coffee date. It looked almost exactly the same. the mismatched chairs and bookshelves still in place, though the owner had changed. "I cannot believe it has been 10 years, Lillian said, holding Gregory's hand across the small table. "Best 10 years of my life," Gregory said. "Well, 13 if you count from when we met." "Always with the counting," Lillian teased. "I like to keep track of the important things," he said, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. They talked about their children, about their work, about their dreams for the future. Gregory wanted to start a foundation to support literacy programs in underserved communities. Lillian wanted to write more books and maybe teach a class on editing at a local college. They had plans, so many plans, and they were excited to pursue them together. As they left the cafe, Gregory stopped her on the sidewalk. "I have something for you." He pulled a small box from his pocket and Lillian's eyes widened. "Another ring." "Not quite," he said, opening it to reveal a delicate bracelet with 13 small charms. "One for each week before I proposed. I had this made for you." Lillian felt tears prick her eyes as she examined each charm. There was a tiny cookie, a book, a coffee cup, a lemon, and others that represented their journey. "Gregory, this is beautiful." "You are beautiful," he said, fastening it around her wrist. "And I wanted you to have something that reminds you of where we started." "I could never forget," Lillian said, kissing him. That night, after they had returned home and tucked their children into bed, they sat on the couch in their living room, Lillian's head resting on Gregory's shoulder. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not started bringing cookies to the office?" Lillian asked. "All the time," Gregory admitted. "But I like to think we would have found each other eventually. Some things are just meant to be." "You really believe that?" "I do," he said, kissing the top of her head. "I believe you were always meant to walk into my life and change everything." Lillian thought about that, about fate and choice and all the little moments that had led them here. Maybe Gregory was right. Maybe they were meant to find each other. Or maybe they had just been lucky. Two people who took a chance on something that felt right. Either way, she was grateful. Grateful for the life they had built, for the love they shared, for the family they had created. It was not perfect. There were still hard days, still disagreements and challenges. But they faced them together, and that made all the difference. As the years continued to unfold, their love became a testament to what was possible when two people truly committed to each other. They celebrated birthdays and holidays, weathered illnesses and losses, supported each other's dreams and ambitions. They grew older together, their hair graying and their faces showing the marks of time, but their love never diminished. Grace went off to college to study literature, following in her mother's footsteps. Henry pursued graphic design, blending his father's business sense with his mother's creativity. And through it all, Gregory and Lillian were there, cheering them on, offering guidance and giving them the freedom to become their own people. On what would have been Lillian's grandmother's 100th birthday, the family gathered in the kitchen to bake her famous chocolate chip cookies. Grace had brought her boyfriend, a kind young man studying law. Henry had brought his sketchbooks, eager to show everyone his latest designs. And Gregory stood at the counter, helping Lillian measure ingredients the way he had done countless times before. "Mom," Grace said as she mixed the dough, "tell us again how you and Dad met." Lillian and Gregory exchanged a smile, the kind of smile that spoke of years of shared memories and inside jokes. "Well," Lillian began, "it all started with cookies." As she told the story, embellishing some parts and downplaying others, Gregory watched her with the same adoration he had felt that first Friday morning. She was still the woman who had walked into his life with a tin of homemade treats and an open heart. She was still the person who made every day better just by being in it. "And then," Lillian said, reaching the end of the story, "on the 13th week your father proposed." "That is so romantic," Grace said with a sigh. "It really is," her boyfriend agreed. Henry rolled his eyes good-naturedly. "You two are disgustingly cute." "Thank you," Gregory and Lillian said in unison, then laughed. As the cookies baked and the kitchen filled with that familiar, comforting smell, Lillian felt a sense of peace settle over her. This was what life was about. Not the grand moments or the big achievements, though those were nice too. It was about this. Family gathered around a kitchen table, sharing stories and laughter, creating memories that would last long after they were gone. Gregory came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist just like he had done so many times before. "I love you," he whispered, so only she could hear. "I love you too," Lillian whispered back. And in that moment, surrounded by the people they loved and the life they had built together, Lillian knew that she would not change a single thing. Every choice, every moment, every Friday morning spent baking cookies had led her here, to this beautiful, messy, perfect life. The cookies came out of the oven golden and perfect, and as the family sat down to enjoy them with cold glasses of milk, Lillian caught Gregory's eye across the table. He raised his glass in a silent toast, and she did the same, both of them acknowledging the journey that had brought them here. It had started with something simple, a batch of homemade cookies and a desire to connect. It had grown into something extraordinary, a love that had withstood the test of time, a family that filled their home with joy, a life that was richer than either of them could have imagined. As the evening wore on and their children continued to talk and laugh, Gregory reached under the table and took Lillian's hand, lacing their fingers together. She squeezed back, a silent communication that spoke volumes. They had found something rare in this world, not just love, but partnership. Not just attraction, but deep, abiding respect and admiration. They had built a life together, brick by brick, cookie by cookie, and it was more than either of them had dared to hope for. When the night finally wound down and their children headed home, Gregory and Lillian stood at the door, waving goodbye. Then they turned to each other, alone in their quiet house, and smiled. "Another successful gathering," Gregory said. "Thanks to the cookies," Lillian replied. "Always the cookies," he agreed. They cleaned up together, moving around the kitchen in the comfortable rhythm of people who had done this 1,000 times before. When the last dish was put away and the counters were wiped clean, they stood in the center of the room, Gregory's arms around Lillian's waist, her head resting on his chest. "Thank you," Gregory said quietly. "For what?" "For saying yes. For taking a chance on me. For building this life with me." Lillian looked up at him, seeing the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago and the man he had become. "Thank you for seeing me, for choosing me, for loving me the way you do." "Every single day," Gregory promised, "for the rest of my life," and he meant it. They both did. As they turned off the lights and headed upstairs, hand in hand, Lillian thought about the young woman she had been, nervous and hopeful, carrying a tin of cookies into an office full of strangers. She thought about how one small gesture had rippled out into the world, creating connections and relationships and ultimately, love. She thought about Gregory, the man who had taken the time to notice her, to appreciate her efforts, to see beyond the surface to the person beneath. She thought about how he had pursued her with patience and respect, how he had loved her with his whole heart from that 13th week to this very moment. And as they climbed into bed, Gregory pulling her close and kissing her forehead, Lillian felt overwhelming gratitude for the life they had created, for the family they had built, for the love that sustained them through everything. "Good night, my love," Gregory whispered. "Good night," Lillian whispered back. And as she drifted off to sleep in the arms of the man who had proposed on the 13th week, who had chosen her every day since, Lillian knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Their story had started with homemade cookies and Friday mornings, but it had become so much more. It had become a lifetime of love, laughter, and shared moments. It had become a family, a home, a beautiful life built on the foundation of respect, trust, and genuine affection. And if anyone ever asked Lillian what her secret was, what made their marriage work when so many others fell apart, she would smile and say it was simple. They chose each other. Every single day, through good times and bad, through challenges and triumphs, they chose love. They chose partnership. They chose each other. Because at the end of the day, that was what mattered most. Not grand gestures or perfect moments, but the quiet, steady commitment to show up for each other, to support each other, to love each other well. It had started with cookies on a Friday morning. It had grown into forever, and Lillian would not have had it any other way.